The chains around Alara Winter's wrists bit into her skin as the royal carriage lurched over another pothole, but she refused to cry out. She had learned long ago that showing pain only invited more of it, and she would not give these soldiers the satisfaction. Through the barred window, she watched her village disappear into the misty horizon, the only home she had ever known fading like a half-remembered dream. The autumn leaves swirled in the wind, crimson and gold, beautiful and indifferent to her fate. She wondered if she would ever see another autumn, or if the notorious Alpha King Kale Stormborn would execute her before the first snow fell. Everyone knew his reputation, the conqueror who had unified the werewolf territories through blood and iron, the king who showed mercy to no one, the Alpha whose heart was said to be as cold as the northern glaciers that bordered his kingdom. The accusation against her was absurd, laughable even. Conspiracy against the crown, they had said, when they dragged her from her small cottage at dawn. Alara, a simple Omega who spent her days tending to medicinal herbs and helping the village healer, accused of plotting with rebels to overthrow the most powerful Alpha in existence. She had demanded to see evidence, demanded a trial, but the captain of the guard had merely sneered and told her that the Alpha King himself would judge her fate. That was 3 days ago. 3 days of traveling in this cramped carriage with minimal food and water. 3 days of fear gnawing at her insides like a hungry beast. Yet beneath the fear, anger burned hot and bright. She was innocent, and whoever had framed her would pay if she ever discovered their identity. The Blackstone Palace appeared on the 4th day, rising from the landscape like a monument to power and domination. Its obsidian towers pierced the gray sky, and its walls were said to be impenetrable, built by ancient magic and alpha blood. Alara felt her wolf stir uneasily within her, sensing the overwhelming concentration of dominant energy that emanated from the structure. As an Omega, she had always been sensitive to the hierarchies of pack life, always aware of her place at the bottom. But this was something else entirely. The palace practically vibrated with authority, and at its center sat the Alpha King, the apex predator of their entire species. They hauled her from the carriage without ceremony, and her legs nearly buckled after days of confinement. 2 guards gripped her arms, their hold unnecessarily rough, and marched her through corridors of dark stone illuminated by torches that cast dancing shadows on the walls. Portraits of previous kings stared down at her with stern faces and cold eyes, a lineage of power that stretched back centuries. Courtiers in fine silks paused their conversations to watch her pass, their expressions ranging from curiosity to disdain. She kept her chin high despite the chains, despite the filth that covered her simple dress, despite knowing that she was being led to her possible execution. If she was going to die, she would die with dignity. The throne room doors swung open with a resonant boom that echoed through the vast chamber. Alara's first glimpse of Alpha King Kale Stormborn stole the breath from her lungs, not because of his infamous cruelty, but because of the sheer presence he commanded. He sat upon a throne of black marble veined with silver, his posture relaxed yet radiating lethal grace. He was younger than she had imagined, perhaps in his early 30s, with dark hair that fell to his shoulders and eyes the color of storm clouds, gray and turbulent and ancient beyond his years. His features were carved from granite, all sharp angles and brutal beauty, the face of a warrior king who had earned his crown through conquest. He wore black leather and silver armor engraved with the royal crest, a howling wolf beneath a crown of stars, and even from across the room, Alara could feel the weight of his alpha aura pressing down on her like a physical force. The guards shoved her forward, and she stumbled, but caught herself before falling to her knees. She would not kneel before this king. Not willingly. The room fell silent as Kale's eyes locked onto hers, and in that moment, the world tilted on its axis. Alara felt it like lightning striking through her chest, a connection so powerful and overwhelming that her wolf howled in recognition. No, she thought desperately, this cannot be happening. The mate bond, the sacred link that the moon goddess bestowed upon destined pairs, flared to life between them with the force of a supernova. She could feel everything, his shock mirroring her own, his alpha nature calling to her omega, in a way that transcended reason or choice. The invisible thread that now tied their souls together for eternity. Kale rose from his throne with predatory fluidity, his eyes never leaving hers. And she saw the exact moment when realization crashed over him. His carefully controlled expression cracked, revealing something raw and hungry and almost vulnerable beneath. He descended the steps slowly, each footfall deliberate, while his advisors and courtiers whispered among themselves in confusion. When he stood before her, towering over her smaller frame, Alara forced herself to meet his gaze even as the mate bond screamed at her to submit, to accept, to bare her throat to her destined alpha. She could smell him now, pine and smoke and something wild that made her head spin, and she hated how her body responded with a longing she had never experienced before. His voice, when he finally spoke, was deep and rough as gravel, carrying the unmistakable tone of command that all alphas possessed, but magnified tenfold. "You are accused of conspiring with rebels against the crown," he said. And Alara noticed how his hands flexed at his sides as though fighting the urge to reach for her. "What say you to these charges?" She swallowed hard, her throat dry, and forced the words out past the chaos of emotions swirling through her. "I am innocent, Your Majesty. I am a simple village healer. I have never conspired against anyone, least of all you. I demand to see the evidence and face my accuser." A murmur rippled through the assembled court at her boldness, that an Omega prisoner would dare make demands of the Alpha King, but Kale's expression remained unreadable. He circled her slowly, and she felt his gaze travel over her like a physical caress, assessing, claiming, burning. The mate bond pulled taut between them, and she wondered if everyone in the room could see it, this invisible chain that was somehow more binding than the iron around her wrists. "Tell me your name," he commanded, and there was something almost gentle in the request that surprised her. "Alara Winters," she replied, keeping her voice steady through sheer force of will. "And I did not conspire against you. Someone has set me up, framed me for crimes I did not commit, and I demand justice." Kale stopped in front of her again, so close now that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. And when he spoke next, his words were meant only for her ears. "You are my mate," he said simply, stating the truth they both felt. "The moon goddess has bound us together. You will not be executed, Alara Winters, but you will remain here, in my palace, under my protection, until I determine the truth of these accusations and decide what to do with you." Before she could respond, before she could tell him exactly what she thought of being claimed by the man who had imprisoned her, he turned back to his court, and his voice rang out with absolute authority. "This woman is under my personal protection. She will be housed in the East Wing and treated with the respect due to a guest of the crown. Anyone who harms her or shows her disrespect will answer to me directly." The captain of the guard who brought her here looked as though he might protest, but one look from Kale silenced him immediately. "Take her to her chambers," the king continued, gesturing to a pair of female attendants who had materialized at the edge of the room. "See that she is bathed, fed, and given proper clothing. I will speak with her again this evening." And with that dismissal, Alara found herself being led away, her mind reeling from everything that had just transpired. The chambers they brought her to were more luxurious than anywhere she had ever been, with silk curtains and plush carpets and a bed large enough for 4 people. The attendants, 2 young women named Mira and Celeste, removed her chains with apologetic expressions and drew her a bath scented with lavender and rose. As Alara sank into the hot water, finally alone for the first time in days, she allowed herself to process what had happened. She was the mate of Alpha King Kale Stormborn, the most feared ruler in their world, and he had just claimed her in front of his entire court. The mate bond hummed. Beneath her skin, a constant reminder of his presence somewhere in the palace, and she hated how part of her wanted to follow that connection, to seek him out, to complete the bond that nature had started, but she would not be a prize to be won or a possession to be kept. Destiny be damned. Kale had taken her freedom, imprisoned her on false charges, and now expected her to simply accept being his mate because the moon goddess willed it. Ilara had spent her entire life being told what Omegas could and could not do, where they belonged in the hierarchy, how they should behave and speak and think. She had carved out a small measure of independence in her village through her healing work, had built a life on her own terms despite the limitations placed on her rank. She would not surrender that hard-won autonomy to anyone, not even her fated mate, not even the Alpha King himself. When Mira and Celeste returned with an array of dresses, Ilara chose the simplest one, a deep green gown that reminded her of the forest near her village. They braided her long auburn hair and tried to apply cosmetics, but she waved them off, preferring to face Kale as herself, rather than some painted courtier. As evening approached and shadows lengthened across the room, a knock sounded at the door. It was not Kale himself, but a stern-looking beta woman who introduced herself as Lady Morgana, the king's chief advisor. She studied Ilara with shrewd amber eyes that missed nothing, and her expression revealed neither approval nor disapproval. "The king wishes to dine with you," she said without preamble. "You will accompany me to his private chambers. It is not a request." Ilara wanted to refuse, to make some stand against the way she was being ordered about like a doll, but she also knew that if she wanted answers about who had framed her and why she was here, Kale was the most direct source. She followed Lady Morgana through more winding corridors, past guards who stood at attention, and through doors that required special keys. They were ascending into the highest tower of the palace, she realized, to the king's personal domain, where few were permitted to enter. Finally, Lady Morgana stopped before an ornate door carved with wolves and constellations, knocked twice, and then departed without another word, leaving Ilara alone in the hallway. The door opened before she could decide whether to knock again or flee, and Kale stood framed in the entrance, backlit by firelight from within. He had changed from his formal armor into simpler clothing, black trousers, and a loose white shirt that revealed the strong column of his throat, and the edge of dark tattoos that disappeared beneath the fabric. His hair was damp, as though he had recently bathed, and without all the trappings of kingship, he looked almost human, almost approachable, almost but not quite, because his eyes still held that penetrating intensity that made her feel exposed and vulnerable. "Please, come in," he said, his voice softer than it had been in the throne room, and he stepped aside to allow her entry. His chambers were surprisingly understated for a king, decorated with dark wood furniture and tapestries depicting forests and mountains rather than battle scenes. A fire crackled in an enormous stone hearth, and a table was set near the window with 2 place settings and covered dishes that released tantalizing aromas. Ilara's stomach growled despite her nervousness, reminding her that she had barely eaten in days. Kale noticed, and something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. "Please, sit and eat," he said, gesturing to the table. "We have much to discuss, but you look as though a strong wind might blow you over. I would not have my mate collapse from hunger before we have had a chance to properly meet." She bristled at his casual use of the word mate, as though it was already settled, already accepted. "I have not agreed to be your mate," she said sharply, remaining, standing despite the exhaustion that pulled at her bones. "You imprisoned me, accused me of crimes I did not commit, and now you expect me to simply accept this bond because the moon goddess decreed it? I am not some prize you won through conquest, your majesty. I am a person with my own will, my own choices, and I choose not to accept this." Kale's expression darkened, and for a moment she saw the ruthless king everyone feared. But then he took a deliberate breath, and the mask of control slipped back into place. "Sit down, Ilara," he said quietly, and there was something in his voice that compelled her to obey, despite her rebellion. "Sit down and eat and listen to what I have to say. Then you may make your choice, though I think you will find your options are not as clear as you imagine." Reluctantly, she sat, and Kyle served her himself, filling her plate with roasted meat and vegetables and fresh bread, still warm from the ovens. He poured wine into her glass, and then took his own seat, across from her, watching as she took her first hesitant bite. The food was excellent, and despite everything, she found herself eating ravenously while Kale waited with surprising patience. When she finally slowed, he began to speak, his eyes fixed on the fire rather than on her. "I know you believe yourself innocent, and I am inclined to believe you as well," he said. "The evidence against you is thin, circumstantial at best. And now that I have met you, I suspect you were deliberately targeted. To bring you here to the palace, someone knew somehow that you were my mate, and they used false accusations to deliver you to me." Alara set down her fork, her appetite suddenly gone. "What do you mean?" she demanded. "How could anyone know we were mates before we even met? That is impossible." Kale turned his storm-gray eyes back to her, and she saw centuries of weariness in them despite his relatively young age. "There are those with gifts," he said carefully, "seers and oracles who can glimpse threads of fate before they are woven. My court has several such individuals, and it is possible that one of them foresaw our connection and decided to manipulate events to bring it about sooner. Or," he continued, his voice hardening, "it is possible that someone knew and wanted to use you against me to create a vulnerability where none existed before. I have many enemies, Alara, both within my court and beyond my borders. A fated mate is both a strength and a weakness for an alpha, especially one in my position." She processed this information, her healer's mind automatically organizing possibilities and probabilities. "So I am either a gift or a weapon. Is that what you are telling me?" she asked bitterly. "Either way, I am not here by my own choice. I am a pawn in games I do not understand, played by people I have never met." Kyle leaned forward, his intensity focused entirely on her. "You are neither gift nor weapon," he said firmly. "You are my mate, and that makes you the most important person in my life. Whether you accept the bond or not, I will find out who framed you and why, and I will ensure they pay for using you in this manner. But in the meantime, you cannot return to your village. It is not safe. Not now that you have been seen by my entire court. Not now that anyone with eyes could feel the mate bond between us. You will remain here under my protection until the threat is neutralized." "Protection," Ilara repeated, the word tasting like ash on her tongue. "You mean imprisonment?" Kale's jaw tightened. "I mean protection," he insisted. "You will have freedom within the palace grounds. You may go where you wish, speak to whom you choose, continue your healing work if you desire it. The palace has extensive gardens with medicinal herbs, and the court healer would welcome an assistant. You will be treated with the respect and honor due to the Alpha King's mate. The only restriction is that you cannot leave the palace grounds without my permission and a full security detail. Given that someone wanted you here badly enough to frame you for treason, I will not risk your safety by being careless. If someone wanted to deliver her to the palace, wouldn't she be safer away from it?" But even as the thought formed, Alara recognized the flaw in that logic. If enemies existed within the court, they likely had reached beyond it as well. She stood abruptly, pacing to the window to stare out at the night sky dotted with stars. The mate bond pulled at her, urging her to move closer to Kale, to seek his touch, his comfort. But she fought against it with every ounce of will she possessed. "I need time," she said finally, not looking at him. "Time to think. Time to process all of this. Time to decide what I want rather than what fate or you or anyone else has decided for me. I will stay in the palace, because you have made it clear I have no other choice. But do not expect me to play the role of devoted mate. Do not expect me to fall at your feet, because the moon goddess drew a line between our souls. I barely know you, and what I do know is that you are a conqueror, a king who built his throne on the backs of those he defeated. That is not the foundation for love or partnership, or whatever it is you think this bond means." She heard him stand, heard his footsteps approaching, and then he was behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat of him, close enough that the mate bond sang with proximity. When he spoke, his breath stirred the hair near her ear, sending shivers down her spine, despite her best efforts to remain unmoved. "You are right to question. he said softly, and there was a vulnerability in his voice she had not expected. You are right to demand more than blind acceptance of fate. I have been king for 15 years, Alara. I took the throne when my father was assassinated by his own brother, when I was barely past my majority, and the realm was tearing itself apart in civil war. I did what I had to do to survive, to protect my people, to build something stable from the chaos I inherited. I have made hard choices, brutal choices, and I will not apologize for them because they were necessary, but I never wanted to be alone through it all. Never wanted to be the monster everyone believes me to be. He paused, and she could hear the ragged edge in his breathing, could feel the tension vibrating through him where his presence warmed her back. I never believed I would find my mate. He continued. I thought perhaps the moon goddess had passed me by, decided I was too damaged or too dangerous to deserve that gift. And then you walked into my throne room in chains, and you looked at me not with fear but with fury, and I felt something I had never felt before. Hope. Alara, you gave me hope that perhaps I could be more than the killer king, more than the conqueror who sleeps alone and trusts no one. But I understand that you need time, that this is overwhelming, that I have no right to demand your acceptance when I have given you no reason to trust me. So take your time, learn about me, let me learn about you, and we will see if we can build something real beneath the mandate of fate. Alara closed her eyes, fighting against the tears that threatened to fall and the traitorous warmth that spread through her chest at his words. She wanted to hate him, needed to hate him to maintain her sense of self. But the mate bond whispered that he was telling the truth, that beneath the armor of kingship was a man as lonely and lost as she often felt. Tomorrow, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, tomorrow you will show me the evidence against me. All of it. You will give me access to your court records and introduce me to those who accused me. I want to find the truth myself, not simply accept your version of it. And while I search for answers, you will give me space. No demands, no expectations, no commands cloaked as requests. If we are to build anything real, as you say, it must be built on choice, not on the compulsion of this bond or your authority as king. She felt, rather than saw, his nod of agreement. You have my word, he said. And then, with what must have been tremendous effort given the pull of the mate bond between them, he stepped back, putting distance between them once more. I will have everything you requested delivered to your chambers tomorrow morning, and I will assign someone to assist you in your investigation. But Alara, he added, and she finally turned to face him, surprised by the intensity of concern in his storm-gray eyes. Be careful who you trust. My court is a nest of vipers, and not everyone will be pleased that I have found my mate. There are those who benefited from my isolation, who wielded influence because I had no one I truly trusted. Your presence threatens the balance of power they have grown accustomed to, and they will not surrender it without a fight. If you make yourself vulnerable while searching for truth, they will not hesitate to strike. The warning sent ice through her veins, but Alara straightened her shoulders and met his gaze with determination. Then you had better make sure your protection is as good as you claim, Your Majesty, she said with more bravado than she felt. Because I will find the truth, and if members of your own court are involved in framing me, then we will both have difficult decisions to make about loyalty and justice. Kyle's expression shifted into something that might have been respect or admiration, and a ghost of a smile touched his lips. You are stronger than you appear, Alara Winters, he observed. I think perhaps the moon goddess knew exactly what she was doing when she bound us together. I have been surrounded by sycophants and warriors for so long that I had forgotten what true courage looks like. You have it in abundance, and I find myself grateful for it, even as I worry about what that courage might cost you. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and possibilities, until finally Alara broke the connection and moved toward the door. Thank you for the meal and the honesty, she said formally. I will see you tomorrow when you deliver on your promises. And Kyle, she added, using his name for the first time without his title, her hand on the door handle. Whatever you may hope this bond becomes, know that I will not be tamed or molded into what you think you need. If we are to be anything to each other, you will have to accept all of me, including the parts that challenge you and refuse to submit. I have spent my entire life being told what omegas should be, and I am done bending myself to fit others' expectations. Take it or leave it, but those are my terms. She did not wait for his response before slipping through the door and making her way back through the winding corridors to her chambers, following the path Lady Morgana had taken earlier through sheer memory and determination. Her heart pounded in her chest, adrenaline and confusion, and that damned mate bond creating a cocktail of emotions she could barely contain. When she finally reached her room and closed the door behind her, she sagged against the wood and allowed herself a moment of weakness, of fear, of overwhelming uncertainty about the future. Everything she had known, her simple life and small freedoms, had been ripped away in a matter of days. Now she was trapped in a palace full of political machinations, bound by fate to a king she did not know, suspected of crimes she did not commit, and apparently in danger from enemies she could not identify. It was too much, far too much for one person to bear. But as the initial wave of emotion receded, Alara felt something else rising to take its place, something harder and more resolute. She had survived being an orphan Omega in a world that valued neither. She had built a life through determination and skill when everyone told her to simply accept her low station. She had stared down the Alpha King himself and demanded to be treated as an equal, despite every instinct and social conditioning screaming at her to submit. She was stronger than she had ever given herself credit for, and she would survive this too. More than survive, she would uncover the truth, protect herself from whatever threats lurked in the shadows of the court, and decide for herself what kind of relationship, if any, she would have with Cale Stormborn. The mate bond did not own her, and neither did he. She was still Alara Winters, healer and survivor, and no king or destiny would take that identity from her. If you're enjoying this story of Alara and Cale's complicated journey, make sure to like and subscribe for more werewolf romance content. Drop a comment below telling me if you think Alara should give the Alpha King a chance, or if she's right to keep her walls up. The next part of their story gets even more intense as the conspiracy starts to unravel and forces Alara and Cale closer together, whether they like it or not. The following morning arrived with pale autumn sunlight filtering through Alara's windows, and she woke disoriented for a moment before memory came crashing back. The palace, the mate bond, Cale, all of it real and inescapable. She had barely slept, her mind churning with questions, and her body hyper-aware of Cale's presence somewhere in the palace through their connection. It was maddening, this constant awareness of another person, as though part of her consciousness was now devoted entirely to tracking him. She could feel when he was close and when he was distant, could sense shifts in his emotional state like phantom echoes of her own feelings. No wonder bonded pairs were said to be inseparable. This kind of connection would drive anyone mad if they tried to fight it indefinitely. Mira and Celeste arrived with breakfast and the promised documents, crates of court records and testimonies that they stacked carefully on the desk in her sitting room. They chattered cheerfully as they worked, seemingly delighted to be serving the Alpha King's mate. And Alara found their genuine warmth a small comfort in the strangeness of her situation. After they left, she dove into the records with single-minded focus, her healer's training serving her well as she cataloged symptoms of conspiracy, the way she might catalog symptoms of disease. The accusations against her had originated from an anonymous tip, claiming she was seen meeting with known rebels in the forest near her village. The report was submitted by a minor lord, whose lands bordered her region, Lord Thaddeus Blackwood, and it had been corroborated by 2 of his men, who swore they witnessed the meeting. Alara knew immediately that it was fabricated. She had never met with anyone in secret, had no contact with rebels or dissidents, and certainly had never ventured far enough into the forest to avoid detection. But the accusations had been enough for Cale's captain of guards to act, especially combined with rumors that rebels were planning an attempt on the king's life during his upcoming tour of the provinces. Someone had constructed a believable enough lie wrapped around a kernel of current events to make her arrest seem justified and urgent. The question was why Lord Blackwood would target her specifically, an Omega healer of no political significance, unless he had been ordered to do so by someone else. She spent hours cross-referencing names and dates looking for patterns in the testimony and connections between the accusers. What she found made her blood run cold. Lord Blackwood had accumulated significant debts over the past 2 years, debts that had mysteriously been forgiven just weeks before he submitted his report about her. The forgiveness had come through a third-party holding company. But with enough digging through financial records, Alara traced the company back to a consortium of noble houses led by Duke Cornelius Ashford, one of the most powerful lords in Kale's court, and a man who served on the king's council. If the Duke was involved in framing her, the implications were staggering, suggesting a plot that went far beyond one Omega being used as a pawn. A knock at her door interrupted her research, and she looked up to find not a servant, but Kyle himself standing in her doorway. He looked tired, with shadows under his eyes suggesting he had slept as poorly as she had, but his presence still commanded attention and sent her traitorous heart racing. "I heard you had been working since dawn," he said without preamble. "Have you found anything?" Alara gestured to the spread of documents covering every available surface. "I have found evidence of a conspiracy," she said bluntly, watching his reaction carefully. "Lord Blackwood, who accused me, had his substantial debts forgiven by a company that traces back to Duke Ashford. Either this is the most unfortunate coincidence in history, or your own council member orchestrated my arrest. The question is why?" Kale's expression turned to stone, and suddenly she could see the ruthless king beneath the veneer of control. "Cornelius," he said, and the name was laced with venom. "I should have known. He has been pushing for me to marry his daughter for years, claiming that an alliance with his house would strengthen the realm. When I refused repeatedly, he grew increasingly hostile in council meetings, blocking initiatives and sowing discord where he could. If he somehow learned that my fated mate existed, he might have decided to eliminate the threat before we ever met, or to bring us together in a way that would create maximum chaos and instability. Either outcome would serve his purposes if it weakened my position, or made me desperate enough to bargain with him." Alara stood and moved closer to him, drawn by the mate bond, but also by genuine concern at the fury radiating from him. "What will you do?" she asked. "You cannot simply accuse a duke without proof, can you? Even if we suspect his involvement, these financial records might not be enough to move against him openly." Kyle's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You are right, unfortunately," he admitted. "Cornelius has too much support among the older noble houses, too many alliances built over decades. If I accuse him without irrefutable evidence, I risk civil war, or at minimum a fracturing of the council that could destabilize everything I have built. But I will not let this stand. Ilara, he used you, put you in danger, and likely has plans to use your presence here to further his own agenda. We need to draw him out, make him reveal his hand fully before we strike." The "we" in that statement did not escape her notice. The casual assumption that they would work together despite her insistence on independence. But Alara found that she did not mind as much as she should, perhaps because uncovering the truth felt like reclaiming some measure of control over her situation. "How do we draw him out?" she asked, matching his strategic tone. "What would make him act rashly enough to expose himself?" Kale studied her for a long moment, conflict clear on his face, before he answered. "We announce our intention to complete the mate bond," he said quietly. "We make it known that I intend to make you my queen, my Luna, and that you have accepted the bond. Cornelius will see his plans crumbling and will be forced to act quickly, likely making mistakes in his haste. But Alara," he added, reaching out to take her hand before checking himself and letting his arm fall, "this puts you directly in the line of fire. Anyone allied with Cornelius or seeking to prevent our union will see you as a target to be eliminated. It is dangerous, perhaps more dangerous than simply waiting for another opportunity to gather evidence." Alara considered his words, weighing risk against reward, fear against the burning need for justice and truth. "If we do nothing," she said slowly, Cornelius and whoever works with him will simply try again with different tactics. They will continue to manipulate and scheme until they get what they want, or until someone gets hurt. But if we force their hand now, we control the timing and can prepare for their response. I say we do it, announce the intention publicly, and see who shows themselves as enemy or friend. Besides, she added with a slight smile that held more steel than humor, I am harder to kill than I look, and I suspect you will not let anything happen to your fated mate, regardless of whether I have accepted the bond. Something flickered in Cale's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or respect. Or that dangerous combination of both that made her stomach flutter despite her best efforts to remain detached. You constantly exceed my expectations, Alara Winters, he said. And this time he did reach for her, his large hand gently cupping her face with a tenderness that contrasted sharply with his fearsome reputation. I do not deserve you as my mate, but I swear on my life and my crown that I will protect you through whatever comes. And perhaps, when this is over, and the threats are neutralized, you will give me a chance to earn what fate has given me, a chance to prove that I can be the partner you deserve, rather than just the king you are bound to. The touch of his skin against hers sent electricity racing through every nerve, the mate bond roaring to life with an intensity that stole her breath. For just a moment, Alara let herself lean into it, let herself imagine what it might be like to surrender to this connection and discover if the man behind the crown was worth the risk. But then she pulled back gently, not in rejection, but in preservation of the boundaries she needed to maintain. First we survive, she said softly. First we uncover the full conspiracy and protect your throne, and possibly both our lives. Then we can discuss what comes next, and whether this bond will be a blessing or a curse for both of us. Cale nodded, understanding in his eyes, and stepped back to give her space, even though she could see how much the separation cost him. Agreed, he said. I will arrange for the announcement to be made at tonight's feast. The entire court will be present, and we will watch carefully to see who celebrates and who plots in the shadows. The feast that evening was a spectacle of wealth and power that made Alara's village celebrations look like paupers' gatherings. The great hall was lit by hundreds of candles. Long tables groaned under the weight of elaborate dishes, and courtiers dressed in their finest silks and jewels filled every available space with their chatter and political maneuvering. Alara wore a gown that Mira and Celeste had insisted upon, deep midnight blue with silver embroidery that caught the light like stars, and her hair was arranged in an elaborate style that made her look like someone who belonged in this world of nobility. She felt like an imposter, a simple omega playing dress-up, but she held her head high and kept her expression neutral as Cale led her into the hall with her hand resting on his arm. The crowd quieted immediately at their entrance, all eyes turning to assess the Alpha King and the mysterious woman at his side. Alara could feel the weight of their scrutiny, could sense the mix of curiosity, jealousy, and calculation in the gazes that tracked their progress to the high table. Cale seated her at his right hand, a position of honor traditionally reserved for the Luna Queen, and the message was clear, even before he stood to address the assembly. My lords and ladies, he began, his voice carrying easily through the vast space. I have called this feast to share news of great personal joy. Many of you have already heard rumors, and I am here to confirm their truth. This woman, Alara Winters, is my fated mate, the bond chosen for me by the moon goddess herself. I intend to complete our bond and make her my Luna Queen, and I expect all of you to treat her with the respect and honor due to that position. The announcement sent a ripple of shock and excitement through the crowd, though Alara noticed several faces that remained carefully blank or showed barely concealed displeasure. Duke Cornelius Ashford sat 3 tables away, his expression frozen in what might pass for a polite smile, but his eyes cold and calculating. Next to him, a beautiful woman with sharp features and elaborate golden hair. His daughter, Seraphina, looked as though she might shatter the wine glass. She gripped. Lord Blackwood was absent, Alara noted, which either meant he was not important enough to merit an invitation, or he had been warned to stay away. Other council members showed varying degrees of surprise or acceptance, and Alara filed away each reaction for later analysis. The feast continued with forced gaiety, course after course of rich food that Alara barely tasted while she observed the court's dynamics. Nobles approached to offer congratulations that ranged from genuine to transparently false, and she smiled and thanked them, while memorizing names and alliances. Kyle remained close throughout, his presence at her side both protective and possessive, though he honored his promise not to crowd her or make demands. She caught him watching her several times with an expression she could not quite decipher, something between admiration and hunger, and a vulnerability that seemed at odds with his powerful position. Midway through the evening, Duke Ashford finally approached, moving with the confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. "Your Majesty," he said with a bow that managed to convey respect, while somehow also suggesting condescension. "May I offer my congratulations on finding your mate? It is indeed wonderful news for the realm to know that you will have an heir to secure the succession." His eyes slid to Alara, assessing and dismissive, though I must confess surprise at the moon goddess's choice. An Omega from a backwater village seems an unusual match for the Alpha King, but I suppose fate works in mysterious ways. The insult was delivered with such polite phrasing that calling it out would seem churlish, but Alara felt Kyle tense beside her and knew he had caught the underlying message. Before Kale could respond with the fury she sensed building in him, Alara spoke first, her voice clear and carrying a hint of steel beneath its pleasant tone. "The moon goddess's wisdom has never been questioned by those who are wise themselves. Duke Ashford," she said with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Perhaps it is those who think themselves above fate's decrees who find her choices mysterious. As for my origins, I have found that character and courage are not determined by birthplace or rank, but by one's actions when tested. I look forward to proving myself worthy of the position I have been given, just as I am certain all members of this court continually prove themselves worthy of the king's trust." The implication was subtle, but clear, a reminder that worthiness was not permanent, and trust could be lost. And she watched satisfaction flash across several faces of those who clearly had no love for the Duke. Duke Ashford's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Indeed," he said, recovering his composure with practiced ease. "I am certain you will learn much about court life in the coming weeks. It can be quite dangerous for those unfamiliar with its intricacies. So many unfortunate accidents have befallen the unwary over the years. One must always be vigilant." It was a threat thinly veiled as concern, and Alara felt rather than saw Kale's wolf rise close to the surface, his alpha power pressing against the room like a physical weight. The Duke bowed again and retreated before the king could respond. But the damage was done, the lines clearly drawn between those who would support Kale's mate and those who saw her as an obstacle to be removed. As the feast finally wound down and guests began to depart, Kale drew Alara aside into a quieter corridor, away from prying eyes and ears. "You handled Cornelius perfectly," he said with clear admiration. "You neither backed down nor gave him ammunition to use against you. But his threat was explicit, Alara. He will move against you soon, perhaps within days. We need to increase your protection and limit your exposure until we can gather enough evidence to move against him." Alara shook her head firmly. "If I hide or appear weak, it proves his point that I am unworthy and gives him more ammunition to turn the court against us," she argued. "No, we proceed as planned. I continue to investigate, to integrate into court life, to show that I am strong enough to be your mate and Luna. But we do so carefully and with awareness that danger is close. I am not foolish enough to walk into a trap, but I will not cower either." Kale looked as though he wanted to argue, his instinct clearly to lock her away somewhere safe until the threat passed, but he visibly wrestled with that impulse and his promise to respect her autonomy. Finally, he nodded reluctantly. "Then you will have guards with you at all times when you leave your chambers," he insisted. "Personal guards I trust absolutely, not members of the regular palace contingent who might have divided loyalties. And you will wear this," he added, pulling a delicate silver chain from his pocket. It hung with a small pendant carved with protective runes. It belonged to my mother. She wore it every day and claimed it saved her life more than once. It has been blessed by the pack's shaman and will offer some protection against poison and certain dark magics. It is not invincible, but it might buy you time if someone tries something foolish. Elara took the necklace, feeling the weight of history and sentiment in the cool metal. Your mother's, she repeated softly. That is significant. A statement to the court and to yourself. Are you certain you want me to wear it? Kale's expression softened in a way she had not seen before. My mother died protecting this realm and the people she loved, he said quietly. She was the strongest person I have ever known, fierce and kind in equal measure. If she were alive, I think she would like you very much, and I think she would approve of my choice to honor her memory by giving this to you. Besides, he added with a ghost of a smile, it sends a message to Cornelius and anyone else watching. You are under my protection, and anyone who harms you will face the full wrath of the Alpha King. That is not a threat I make lightly, and they know it. Elara allowed him to fasten the chain around her neck, hyper-aware of his nearness and the brush of his fingers against her skin. The mate bond sang between them, urging them closer, urging completion of what fate had started, but both of them held back through sheer force of will. When the clasp was secure, she met his eyes and saw her own confusion and desire reflected back. We are playing a dangerous game, she whispered, pretending to accept the bond while keeping our true distance, drawing out enemies while trying to survive their attacks, learning to trust each other while knowing that everything about this situation has been manipulated by others. How do we know what is real and what is just the bond forcing us together? Kale cupped her face in both hands, his touch gentle despite the calloused strength of a warrior's hands. I cannot speak for you, he said honestly, but I know that what I feel is more than just the mate bond. Yes, fate drew a line between our souls, but you would fascinate me regardless. Your strength, your refusal to be diminished by those who think they are superior, your sharp mind and sharper tongue. These are things I value that have nothing to do with destiny. The bond makes me want to protect you, to claim you, to keep you close, but you make me want to be worthy of you, to be better than the monster I have sometimes had to be. That is real, Elara, as real as anything I have ever known. Before she could respond, before she could process the raw honesty in his words, the sound of running footsteps echoed down the corridor. One of Kale's personal guards appeared, breathing hard, his face pale with urgency. Your Majesty, he gasped out between breaths. There has been an incident, an attempt on Lady Elara's life. Someone left poisoned wine in her chambers, and one of the serving girls drank from it by mistake. She is fighting for her life in the healer's wing, and the guards are securing the area now. Whoever did this wanted to kill Lady Elara before she could bond with you, and they nearly succeeded. The world tilted on its axis as the reality of her danger became concrete rather than theoretical. Someone had just tried to murder her, would have succeeded if not for a twist of fate that put someone else in her chambers. Elara felt Kale's arms come around her as her knees weakened, felt his fury vibrating through him as he held her against his chest. That is it, he said, and his voice held the absolute authority of a king whose patience had been exhausted. The game is over. Cornelius and anyone working with him have just signed their own death warrants. No one attempts to kill my mate and lives to speak of it. Guards, secure the palace. No one enters or leaves without my direct permission. Alert my council that there will be an emergency session at dawn. And someone find me Duke Ashford immediately. He will answer for this. Tonight, evidence be damned. As chaos erupted around them with guards rushing to follow orders and servants being questioned, Elara clung to Kale and realized that whether she was ready or not, whether she had accepted the mate bond or not, they were now inextricably bound together in this fight for survival. The conspiracy ran deeper than either of them had suspected, and the only way through it was together. She looked up at the man who fate had chosen for her, saw the fierce protectiveness and barely restrained violence in his storm-gray eyes, and made a decision. I accept, she said clearly, loud enough for him to hear over the commotion. I accept the mate bond, Kale. Not because I am afraid or because I need your protection, but because I choose you. I choose to face this together rather than apart, to be partners in truth rather than just in name. Whatever comes next, we face it as true mates, bonded and united. Now let us find who tried to kill me and make them regret the day they decided to use me as a pawn in their games. The epilogue found Alara standing on the balcony of the royal chambers 6 months later, watching the sun rise over the realm that was now as much hers as it was Kale's. So much had changed since that night of the poisoning attempt. So much blood and revelation and transformation that sometimes she barely recognized her old life. Duke Ashford had indeed been behind the conspiracy, along with a network of nobles who sought to control the throne. Through manipulation and assassination, the investigation that followed had torn through the court like wildfire, exposing decades of corruption and treachery. In the end, justice had been served, though not without cost. The serving girl who had accidentally drunk the poisoned wine had survived thanks to Alara's healing knowledge, and in gratitude had provided testimony that helped seal the Duke's fate. Kale joined her on the balcony, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his chin on her shoulder in a gesture that had become familiar and cherished over these months together. The completed mate bond thrummed between them, no longer a source of conflict, but a source of strength, connecting them in ways that transcended words or physical touch. "Good morning, Luna," he murmured against her ear, using the title she had earned through trial by fire rather than simple acceptance. "Sleep well?" Alara leaned back against his solid warmth and smiled. "I slept perfectly, as I always do with you beside me," she replied, though I still had dreams about that night, about how close we came to losing everything before we really began. "Do you ever regret it, Kyle? Regret how complicated and dangerous our bond has been?" He turned her in his arms so she faced him, his storm-gray eyes clear and certain. "Never," he said firmly. "You challenged me from the moment we met, refused to be what I expected or what fate demanded, and in doing so you saved me from the isolation I had resigned myself to. You brought light to this dark palace, reform to a court that had grown stagnant with tradition, and purpose to a king who had forgotten why he fought so hard for peace. Our bond was forged in fire and conspiracy, yes, but that makes it stronger, not weaker. I would not change a single moment, even the terrifying ones, because they brought us here, to this morning, and this peace we fought for together." Alara rose on her toes to kiss him, a gentle affirmation of everything they had built and everything they would continue to build in the years to come. The Alpha King had indeed taken her freedom that day in the throne room, had taken her life as she knew it, and thrust her into a world of danger and politics and power. But in return, she had taken his heart, had claimed the fierce warrior king as thoroughly as he had claimed her, and together they had forged something new. She was no longer just Alara Winters, the Omega Healer, and he was no longer just Kale, Stormborn the Conqueror King. They were mates, partners, Luna and Alpha, bound by fate, but choosing each other every single day through action and word and love freely given. The palace bells began to ring, calling them to another day of ruling together, and Alara smiled as she took her mate's hand and walked inside to face whatever challenges awaited. Their story was far from over, but she no longer feared the unknown, not when she had Kyle beside her and the strength of their bond to carry them through anything. Thank you so much for experiencing this journey with Alara and Kale. If you loved their story of destiny, danger, and the love that conquered both, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel for more supernatural romance content. Comment below and tell me what your favorite moment was, whether it was Alara standing up to the Alpha King, the conspiracy unraveling, or the epic conclusion where they chose each other despite everything. Your support means the world, and I cannot wait to bring you more stories of fated mates, powerful alphas, and the fierce omegas who change their lives forever. Until next time, may you find your own fated mate, and may your bond be as strong as Alara and Kale's.